Spirals. What of it? I want one.
Nobody knows where the spiral truly originates from. Well, the word for it at least based itself off of the medieval Latin word spiralis, which in return was Latin for spira, which is also a chocolate bar made by Cadbury, the same company behind those caramel sweets, and their ads in the UK star a sweet seductive humanoid rabbit, which I'm just gonna hold on for a few seconds. Still watching this? Congratulations, you're a furry now.
Expect your diploma by next week.
And you know that there are people out there right now who find spirals scary? Well, this guy certainly did. Enter Junji Ito, who has commonly been cited as the David Cronenberg of the manga industry, coming out with some of the most disturbing concepts you will ever come up with for pretty much anything. Balloons with your face on it that cause you to hang yourself. Girl stricken with immortality that drives her admirers to go insane. Shark, spiders, and that all cultivated in what many people see as Ito's masterpiece, his magnum opus in psychological horror, well, the one about the immortal girl driving people insane, but Uzumaki comes a close second. Yeah, this is probably the one you all know him for, and I can't be a contrarian here. Ito went above and beyond with what could be done with an idea as simple as a town that has a spiral-related curse. Like, seriously, what else am I supposed to say about it? That it's good? That's not very original. So you think with something as brutal and infamous as that would get an adaptation later down the line, right? There's no doubt about it, Uzumaki is Ito's baby, and just like with any child, he doesn't want it to be morphed into something it's not. And for a while, it hasn't really gotten any mainstream adaptation outside of a movie in 2000, but that was only available as an import for a while. That was until 2018 when Adult Swim came in and asked Ito if they would be allowed to do an adaptation of the manga, and as per usual, he was very hesitant on it. I mean, wouldn't you be worried too if your own project was being helmed by the guys who made
This is what I do, I sit on you, sit on you, sit on you. This is what I do, I sit on you, right on your lap.
But they did eventually manage to sway him by saying that it'll be done entirely in black and white, something that was completely unheard of for a modern production in that field. Thus, in 2023, it was announced that an Uzumaki anime would be in the works and airing on Adult Swim Saturday Toonami block. If only I knew that at the time. I'm just joking with you. I was absolutely over the moon with it. I told my college friends about it immediately. I was that excited. Though, understandably so, they were a little skeptical on if it could turn out to be good or not, considering that they are squeezing 20 chapters into a measly 4 episodes, and Ito's adaptation's less than stellar track record. Didn't stop my excitement levels though, since a solid year later the show proper was released, and I have things to say about it. And what better place to start than with episode 1. And yep, it's Uzumaki, alright. No, really, what can you say about this? Tonally and stylistically, this is pretty much the original manga to a T. It's very slow and eerie, almost like if the cast of Uzumanga Daioh was dropped into a Lovecraft novel written by David Cronenberg. So what else am I really supposed to say about it outside of just listing the things that I really like about it? So let's list the things that I really like about it. First of all, it's based on Uzumaki. Hang on, I don't think that's in the script. Second of all, the gorgeous animation. Everything about the animation in this first episode is so ungodly unnatural. It's like if the Uncanny Valley made an anime. If you've never heard of the manga beforehand and watched these scenes without any sort of context, they'd still be seen as some of the most original and terrifying scares that you would ever see in your entire life. Because it's made very clear that the people making this love the original manga and wanted to look as close to it as humanly possible, which for the majority of this episode, they do. Everything here looks like it was ripped straight out of the manga, like some frames were just torn out and animated from the panels that they chose. And last but certainly not least, am I allowed to point out the fact that—
Oh my god, the soundtrack is so amazing!
This has to be one of the most disturbing soundtracks to pretty much anything, if I have to be honest with myself. The build-up of each track, the lack of a time signature, the distorted sounding horns, all done to the pattern of a spiral, meaning that yes, not even the music is safe of Kurozu's curse. The most notable thing about the music, though, is... okay, if I'm allowed to break character for a moment here, note the music in the background. It's called Judges, if you're wondering. Now, would you believe me that Judges and the music for the show were both done by the same person? Enter Colin Stetson, one of the most badass avant-garde instrumentalists of the 21st century. The guy who can make pretty much any noise you could imagine with just the saxophone. And as someone who always loves that kind of ingenuity when it comes to what you're able to do with an instrument, this guy's my hero. Not just that, but he also did the music for such awesome movies like Hereditary, The Menu, Color Out of Space, and, well, for Yaofor ain't bad. Unsurprisingly, the first episode was received almost rapturously well, and had people all over the internet saying that this finally broke the Ito adaptation curse. So yeah, it was pretty good. Then episode 2 came out, and oh dear, the quality took a big dip. Oh. You may have noticed from that this episode is not directed by Hiroshi Nagahama, but rather Yuji Maruyama, the chief animator of the Urusei Yatsura movie, which kinda explains why everyone in this looks like they should be screaming. This was the biggest problem I had with the show long before it started to air, trying to squeeze a free volume 19-chapter manga into 4 episodes. There was no way that it could work flawlessly unless every episode is over 40 minutes, or if each chapter got its own episode. It's an interesting approach that they decided to go with for this one, even if the pacing does feel a little too fast at times. But then again, it at least feels more like a complete project when you see it from a bird's eye view, which is something that most Ito adaptations seem to miss. With that being said, why does every single character sound like they're supposed to be saying... Oh my god, even worse, they decide to make the ballsy decision to adaptate the Black Lighthouse, the Snail, Jack in the Box, and Medusa all in one episode. And yet it's all paced so awkwardly. Each plotline barely has any room to breathe, and as soon as one segment starts to get interesting, it pussies out and says, you know what, animating the money shot is good too. With that being said though, while they are still money shots, well, Kazunori and Yukiro's permanent rope entanglement, the look of the charred lighthouse victims, and the visual of Kyoko's hair tying itself around the lamppost, one visual in question being so good it was also shown in the 2000 film adaptation, actually do look visually pleasing to look at. There, you got 1 point there, episode 2, but compared to the other negative points you had, it's not much. Still, I don't get it. Why does it look so bad? I get that they decide to outsource the rest of the series, meaning that the animation isn't going to be very consistent throughout the entire run, but at the same time, look at this in tangent of the first episode. Like, oh, what did I decide to say about 15 minutes earlier? If you've never heard of the manga beforehand and watched these scenes without any sort of context, they'd still be seen as some of the most original and terrifying scares that you would ever see in your entire life. I just want to remind everybody that I said that. What up, Black Lighthouse? Yeah, this episode did kinda ruin one of my favorite Uzumaki chapters. This entire chapter thrives on the slow burn build-up to its bombastic conclusion this time around, with Kiri investigating the lighthouse's source, which just so happens to also be infected by the spiral. It's a brilliantly tense moment with some eerily striking visuals, like when one of the kids trips over the stairs and gets fucking torched by the lighthouse itself. A haunting way to end what was already a pretty flawless chapter. How do they fuck it up? First of all, the segment is only 3.5 minutes. Okay, that doesn't seem too bad so far. Not enough to let the slow burn of it all sink in with you, but I'm sure it'll be enough to, oh my god. Yep, when the lighthouse shines its light so bright that it'll melt glass, the actual effect of it looks pretty bad. The way the CG looking explosion looking like the fart version of the Greedy from Raggedy Ann contrasting against the hand-drawn animation just doesn't give the sense of urgency the extra oomph it really needs. Even when you get to the chapter's most memorable panel, the effect of it is so blurry and overwhelming that you could barely even see it. Okay, it's not that I want to see a kid's skin getting melted off, that goes more for you. You want to see a kid's face getting melted off. It's just that if you describe the light of the lighthouse being so bright that it would melt glass, I want it to feel like it's actually that much of a scorcher as opposed to...
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
People were understandably pissed when this episode came out, saying that it completely squandered the series' potential as the only good Ito adaptation. I talked to a few anime-obsessed friends of mine who've also seen it, and they could back me up on it. It's not just that everything was delivered in a very clumsy way, but it just didn't feel complete, like this was a first draft, and single-handedly made the future of the show's quality uncertain. That wasn't until episode 3 came out, and... at least it's better than episode 2. Oh yeah, there was a jump scare after the credits too, I don't fucking know. The top-notch animation's back again, and this definitely feels more like a follow-up to the first episode's quality, with it flowing more seamlessly than before, which is pretty much code for everybody doesn't look like Kermit the Frog's lobotomy anymore, so I'm cool with this. And hey, I'll give it credit that it does have one of the biggest standout segments of the series, the umbilical cord, which I'll admit was never a really big fan of because it always annoyed me that no one else outside of Crier had caught these maternity vampires out on killing people, but seeing the whole page actually move with the unnatural ways they all go around sucking the blood of other people like mosquitoes has definitely justified the whole chapter's existence for me. It's creepy and I love it. You know what else I love? How they managed to tie the Medusa chapter in with the storm, which was never in the original manga. They didn't have to include that, but it leaves for a pretty eerie visual of how much damage Kyoko's hair really did to her, leaving her more skeleton-like than Danny Elfman. They did that for me. Speaking of scenes that they did for me, yeah, this storm scene is pretty awesome. I wish they kept in the part where Kurozu was still in the center of the hurricane despite no wind blowing from it for a while. But, and this might be a bit of bias considering that I love storms so much, but this feels like a storm. Like, physically and in its tone. There's a lot of destruction, someone who tries to help our leads getting pile-drived by the storm, even lifting full-on rivers into the air. It's full-on chaos. The one difference I could say that wasn't in the manga was that they brought Jack-in-the-Box back for seemingly no reason than to just kill him off again, which is so abruptly hilarious that it might be my favorite part of the episode. And that's where it ends too! There's no conclusion to it all, it just ends! Now this was the acid trip that I was promised! Episode 3's reception was... a little better, but I don't know, anything at this point is gonna look leaks better than... this. But hey, only one episode left to go, and it's based on the final 6 chapters that... Look, I wish that I loved Uzumaki. I mean, I already like it a lot, but I wish that I loved it. Because, if I'm allowed to be honest here, these last few chapters is where the whole story kinda starts to fall apart for me. Don't get me wrong, it's still visually creative, and I can certainly say that I didn't see the ending coming from a mile away, with Shiuchi and Kiri both succumbing to the spiral, effectively ending the town's curse, but the lead up of it all the way to the payoff always felt really messy to me. Like, Ito didn't know how to end this entire overarching story and just threw up his hands and said, there's a city of spirals? Eh? It wasn't terrible per se, but I feel like it could have been a lot more chaotic considering what it's following up, and it could have been paced a little smoother as well. Which I think episode 4 actually does a lot better than the manga. Okay, now that I've effectively punished myself with such blasphemy, yes, I do think that the anime did something better than the manga. And that's with how episode 4 was paced. While I do think the last 6 chapters are pretty weak compared to everything else because I personally think it explains a little too much, I can say that it is a different medium. You could get away with a lot more stuff than you can with film, like over-explaining everything and some parts of the illustration looking a bit off. The medium of film, or in this case animation, doesn't really have to abide by that as long as it still manages to hold your attention. And if it's an adaptation of a book, stage play, or even a piece of history, well, it can still work if it's 100% accurate to the source. Some corners are going to have to be cut so that the film itself doesn't drag on.
You know what I said earlier about the tone of episode 2 being all wonky and not feeling like a complete project? Well, I failed to mention that this is understandably everyone's biggest complaints about the series, and one that kinda plagues the entirety of it. Some parts go on for a little too long, while some, like Medusa and the aforementioned Black Lighthouse, are almost sidelined completely. And then there's ones like the mosquito chapter and the umbilical cord, which I thought were fine just the way they are.
And as far as I know, the only reason they decided to go with this approach was because this was pretty much the only way to adapt Uzumaki.
I get it. I know that there are a lot of people out there who consider this as a masterpiece, so before you all come and kill me, let me explain.
No matter if you can make it 19 episodes so that you could properly dedicate the time to doing every chapter justice, or if it was condensed into a hyperactive yet tone-deaf feature-length film, the outcome will always be the same. A barely consistent, all-over-the-place mess. Which, strangely enough, I see as a benefit. Don't get me wrong, Uzumaki was always consistent with its tone, but the structure is almost non-existent, and it doesn't really have a plot until halfway through Volume 2. And in a strange yet pretty plausible way, this is the best outcome. That's why episode 4 works as well as it does. Sure, the animation is majorly inconsistent throughout. I mean, hell, they managed to bring the duck lips from episode 2 back for after the credits. But everything about it stays true to what Uzumaki is, which is standing out from the rest of the competition.
It's, as well as the source, as corny as this might sound, very avant-garde in a sense. And that's why I'm not giving this as hard of a time as everyone else did. And that's all I have to say, the end.